with you, or I'm not going to rush through a process because I don't, want to get too much dissent throughout that process. And then the other question would be is what do you look for as a councilman when we do have when and if we have a search for a city manager? What type of attributes aside from the technical ones? What type of kind of characteristics would you want the firm when they do look for that manager? What do you want in that manager? So thank you.
Sure. Just to give you a point, as Councilman brought up a question earlier, and I'll try to answer his question, that we all could do a process better, including myself. I have taken on this, I forgot, maybe a couple of years ago, during Ramadan. I invited my colleagues and my mayor for a dinner, just to sit down and have dinner. So when everybody got to the dinner at that time, it was called Jam Jam. I don't know if some of you guys remember that name. And they were closed for a while. So I invited them, and when they got to the dinner, they were like, "Okay, what's the agenda? What do you want?" I'm like, "No, this is just to have dinner." And we sat around, and a couple of my friends as well. We sat around and had dinner, and just a casual conversation. So I think going forward, as council, in order for us to come together, we must actually sit together. Whether it's over bread, or whether it's over coffee, or whether it's over biryani or pierogi or whatever, we gotta find ways to do that. And like I said, including myself, we can all be better at doing that. Now, looking for a new administration or a new city manager, with the credentials being, a given, it has to be someone that understands the dynamic of Hamtramck, and has to be able to not only take my opinion and my thoughts and concern onto the table, well as Councilman Parada's, Councilman Almasmari's, Councilman Hassan, or whomever is there during their tenure. It must find ways to bring us to the table, the elected official, and hear our thoughts and opinions, whether it's just to record it or just to take it into consideration or to utilize it to make decision, whatever the case may be. But administration, the new person must have that key component, be able to listen and bring us to the table. That would be one of my priorities that I look for on the new person, is that they are receptive to hearing our thoughts and opinions. What our vision of Hamtramck is. Maybe I only want Joseph Campo to be lit up during the Christmas time, because I think that, to me, makes me warm and fuzzy, because I see other communities are all lit up. And my thing is, we have some money in the DDA, bring a resolution, tell me to bring a resolution before council to approve $10,000 or $5,000 to buy new lights. I'll do that. I'll convey, that message to my colleagues to approve that. Instead of having, a couple of snowflakes on our light poles, which is, don't get me wrong, it's nice, but we're looking at such a small spot, which you don't really have to spend thousands of dollars to make it look like a shining jewel. So that would be some of those things that I look for, is that find ways to bring us to the table, convey and listen and hear our thoughts. Take that for making your decision, or as a point of knowing where our values are and what we want to see in our community. And that would be one of my priorities in the next administration.
We appreciate you very much for coming and supporting this and being respectful to our two guests. This was a very interesting, valuable discussion that we have. We have much more to talk about. I think we just touched the surface, but we did it. So thank you for being here. Have a good evening.
In terms of the charter school system that takes students away and takes funding away from traditional public schools, and the exodus from the city and the downward spiral that gets in. It's the same way with these cities, that it's a structural financial problem. Like here's the best example. Detroit's 139 square miles, and it's a city that was built at its peak had 1.8 million people. Now it has fewer than 700,000 people, but they still have the same amount of streets they have to keep paved. They still have the same amount of sewer and water lines that they have to maintain, but the tax base is not there to do it, and the money is just not there to do it. So it doesn't matter who you are. It's not something that you can manage your way out of. It is a much deeper, more fundamental problem, and that's why they've put in an emergency manager, and the schools get worse. They put in an emergency manager, and 5, 6, 7 years later, they're putting another one in because they're not solving the underlying structural problems. They try to claim it to be a managerial problem.
Hey, I'm Jim. I live here in Hamtramck. So, I guess my question is, when you have a government that's already set up and it's in a death spiral going down, how is bankruptcy better than a city manager?
Well, the theory and the reality are two different things, as I learned covering the Detroit bankruptcy. But in theory, bankruptcy could be a way to protect public assets. In theory, the bankruptcy court judge cannot force you to divest yourself of assets in order to pay off creditors, because cities are not corporations. You know, a corporation can go out of business. They could owe so much and have to divest in order to satisfy their creditors. They go out of business. They go out of business. Cities can't go out of business. So if you force a city to sell off its assets, it's not going to be able to survive physically. It'll go on as a city, but it'll be so badly damaged won't have economic recovery. So the theory behind Chapter 9 bankruptcies is supposed to protect that. But one thing that happened in the Detroit bankruptcy was that Jones Day, which years before had floated a legal theory that you could use Chapter 9 bankruptcy to go after the pensions of retirees, even in states where there's a strong constitutional protection of those pensions. And they wrote legal scholarly papers about it. They continue to always frequently reference Detroit as an example of a city that this might be put to the test. And then, sure enough, the partner of Jones Day got hired as the emergency manager over Detroit, and his law firm, the one that floated this legal theory, got hired to run the bankruptcy, and darned if they didn't get the court to agree with them, and now retiree pensions are at risk in bankruptcy. So I'm not sure what the benefits of bankruptcy over emergency management are at this point in reality.
If there's no more questions from anybody else, I'd like to ask one last question. Do you know what other cities in Michigan have successfully gotten out of emergency management? And if so, how did they do that?
Well, all of the cities, there were 8 cities at one point that were under emergency managers. All those emergency managers have left office. I don't know the exact number, but I think it is 3 cities that the transition advisory boards have also been dissolved at this point. But you know, one of the major things that was done in all these cities in order to help balance the books was severe cuts to retiree health care plans. A lot of it was similar to what they did in the Detroit bankruptcy. That prior to the bankruptcy, retirees from the city of Detroit had a very good Blue Cross Blue Shield coverage that they paid 20% for. After bankruptcy, what they got was a $125 a month stipend and a shove out the door saying good luck. Because, for some of these people, their cost to get it the equivalent of what they used to have is $1,000 a month. And that the average pension check for a City of Detroit retiree is $18,000 a year. So, if you're making $18,000 a year and you're paying $12,000 a year for your insurance, your retirement is anything but golden. You're struggling every single day to survive. And that's one of the consequences of bankruptcy that doesn't ever get talked about, really. But the same kind of thing was done in city after city under emergency management, but those also being challenged in court, as is the emergency management law itself. As soon as it was filed, the Sugar Law Center in Detroit and others, including the ACLU of Michigan, filed a court action in federal court saying it was unconstitutional. And it would seem like on its face of it, it would just be blatantly unconstitutional, taking away people's right to democracy. But it's anything but simple and clear cut, and really it has been a completely uphill fight all the way, and it is still, basic aspects of it, whether it's even going to be actually heard in court any further or not, are on appeal right now. So it's fighting it in courts has been very difficult. Really, I think that, like, what happened in Flint, right? That you cannot have a more poignant example of the failure of this law. Even if it's successful in other places, if it fails this badly someplace else, there's something wrong with it. Look at all the successes you want, but anything that fails where people die, where kids are damaged for their whole lives because of lead poisoning, there's something wrong with that law. And there has been really nothing in the legislature to improve it, despite the horrible example set in Flint, despite the lack of evidence of the evidence of what a disaster it's been financially for school districts like Highland Parks and the city of Detroit. What it's done in cities like Hamtramck, where, I shouldn't really speak because I'm not a resident here, I don't cover the city, but, in my interviews with people, what I'm saying is the emergency managers here didn't do anything to help build and capitalize on the incredible potential that this city has. So,
How many states are in connection?
I think 17, although I don't know that for certain. But no state gives the degree of unchecked power to the receivers than Michigan. It's the most extreme law of its nature in the United States.
Thank you. Thank you, Kurt Guyette, for your comments on the emergency management law. Our next speaker is a person we're all familiar with here in Hamtramck. Has been the Mayor Pro Tem of Hamtramck since January. And he's a former president of United Steelworkers Union Local 690. He's been a council member for 6 years now. He has led the move to not renew the contract for the city manager here in Hamtramck. And he's currently on the planning board, and he's a former zoning board commissioner for 4 years. So, I mean, when do you have time for your family? I'm just curious. Okay, he has a beautiful family, but he wants to give his service to the city, and we appreciate what he does. Some of us don't appreciate what he does, some of us do. But he's here to try to explain what he does and how this emergency management law applies here to Hamtramck. So let's give respect and listen to our Mayor Pro Tem, Anamia.